Hello, Borda, Prinhanda, Ornosta. I am making probably my second and probably my last video about food anyway, that on my personal YouTube account, that I want to show you guys how to make Welsh cakes, but I'm going to be baking a vegan version of Welsh cakes, so that I'd tell you some of the substitutes that I use. Really the recipe is almost identical to regular Welsh cakes. There are many different variations of Welsh cake recipes that you'll find out there. Some call for butter, some call for lard. I'll be using something different, obviously, because this is a vegan version. But I wanted to show you guys the ingredients that I use, do a quick video with a bit of like the steps that I go through to make the Welsh cakes, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy Welsh cakes yourself. There certainly seems to be a severe lack of Welsh cakes, so I'm hoping that with this video people will become a little bit more introduced to what Welsh cakes are, what they're like, and if you try them out, hopefully you'll like them and make Welsh cakes as well, so we can get more Welsh cakes out in the world. To start with, my usual recipe involves flour to make about, well, the recipe says to make about 20 Welsh cakes, but that really depends on the size of the cutter that you're using and how much you roll out your dough. But you need 2 cups of flour. So I've got some flour here. Mix that in with a teaspoon of baking powder. This is the brand I tend to use, but you can use any kind of baking powder. You also want to, optionally, you can add a half teaspoon of baking soda. You'll need plenty of sugar, at least half a cup that goes into the batter or into the batter itself, but you'll also be using sugar throughout when you're dipping the Welsh cakes in after you've cooked them. You need a pinch of salt. This is one I'll use. A half teaspoon of mixed spice. Now, mixed spice is hard to find sometimes in North America. However, you can find the ingredients you need to make mixed spice. So in the description below, I'll put in the ingredients that you can use. You just buy the raw ingredients, put them into a bag and shake them together and give them a good shake, and you'll end up with the same stuff that I have in here. You can find it occasionally in the supermarket, so if you look in the spice racks, sometimes you'll find them. I know in the beaches area of Toronto, I've just recently found it at Bruno's Fine Foods, which just opened up in the beaches. Sometimes you'll see it, sometimes you won't, but just have a look for it, you'll find it. As well, a half teaspoon of nutmeg. You will need salted butter. Now, in lieu of butter, because this is a vegan version, I am using Miyoko's vegan butter. This is made with cashews. It substitutes exactly for butter in recipes. I've used it before and it tastes great. You can use it on your toast as well. So it's an excellent butter substitute. The one thing I did find with it yesterday, which you saw in my previous video, or may have seen in my previous video, is that if you're using it as a frying medium to, say, fry up mushrooms, it does get very smoky. So maybe less useful for a frying medium, but absolutely for all the other ones. You can still cook with it and fry with it. I used it this morning with some mushrooms in a Teflon pan and didn't smoke as badly, so we'll see. You're also going to need an egg, typically, but I am going to use the Earth Island vegan egg, which as a substitute for egg in baking is great. I didn't really like it so much for eating on a plate, which I had that Just Egg product, which I showed in the previous video. That seems to be a superior product for eating egg on its own. But for cooking and baking, vegan egg really does the job. Usually use a splash of milk, but you need a bit of binding quality to it. So as a vegan alternative to that, I have used soy milk. You only need a very little bit, and you'll see some of that in when we go through the directions, but you don't need that much. Usually when I buy this, because I don't drink much of this stuff, I try to buy the coffee size containers of soy milk, but for some reason the stores have been all sold out of that stuff lately. So I have this. I don't want to waste it, but we'll see how much I'm able to get through later on. And finally, the things you're going to need. A dried fruit. Now, my preference is to use half a cup of currants and half a cup of sultanas. I have also used very successfully dried blueberries. You could experiment with different kinds of dried fruits. Typically, the raisiny style fruits work best. Blueberries obviously are very similar as well, and some people really detest raisins. Dry blueberry seems to work really well for them. So those are the ingredients. I'm going to put them together into the quantities that I need and continue the video once I'm able to assemble them. All right. So it got a bit late last night while I was making those Welsh cakes. So what I did, and you can do this as well, is I took the batter or the dough that I made for the Welsh cakes, and I wrapped it up in saran wrap and put it in the fridge. Now, while making that recipe, I was actually doubling the recipe that I'm going to post below this because I'm making for quite a few people at the moment. But I just wanted to let you know that you can do this way. One thing I do find as well while cooking, after cutting these cookies, they can get quite soft while waiting to be cooked because you generally cut out a lot of cookies before you start cooking them all. What does seem to help that though is if you cut the cookies out, put them onto plates, put those inside the fridge while you're waiting between cooking, they can keep a firmer dough on it, and when you're cooking them they come out much better. So this is the finished dough that I'll be taking some of and rolling out on my counter, which you can't see right now. I'll lower the camera so that you can see it, and so you have an idea of roughly, what size, what shape to use for the cookies. Traditionally, my mom used to use a glass, but I don't really have glasses. I suppose like a glass of this size might do. But I'm going to be using proper cookie cutters. A friend of mine gave me a set several years ago, and I do find, because I make a lot of these cakes, I just generally will try to make them out for larger groups of people, and so using the very smallest of the cookie cutters seems to work really well. If you make the dough fairly thick anyway, it comes out quite nice. Smaller cut is just fine. So I'm going to grab a reasonable chunk of this dough so that I can put that on here, and the rest I'm going to put back in the fridge, since I don't know if I'm going to need to cook all of these right now, but I'll probably be cooking some more tonight. This is what the cookie should generally look like. When you first cut it, you can make it a bit thicker than that if you want. It should be about half a centimeter to a quarter inch. So I'll put that on the plate, and just keep cutting these. Re-roll the dough. Keep adding more of it when you're using up the dough, because you probably can't roll out the entire dough at once. And keep going that so you've got the entire thing cut. Put the cookies in the fridge while you're cutting them once you fill each plate, and then you'll be able to cook it. So I'll continue on from that in a bit, so you'll have an idea. So I tend to use an electric griddle. I find it's easier to have a consistent temperature across the whole surface using one of these. I do heat it to between 225 and 250. I keep it about in that range. Once it's ready, this particular griddle with the size of cutter I have holds about 25 cakes, and we want to cook each side for between 3 and 5 minutes. And when we take each one off the plate at the end of the fully cooked time, you put it straight into a bowl of sugar, flip it over again with sugar, and then set it aside to dry to cool down. Again, a plate of Welsh cakes. If you keep them chilled in the fridge, they tend to cook nicer as well. When you're cutting a lot of these cakes, it tends to be a lot easier to put them in the fridge and keep them stored so that you don't have them getting too soft or starting to melt. Okay, so the skillet is heated up to the proper temperature. I'm just going to put the cakes down, and I'll start my timer in a moment as well. So I'll start the timer now, set it for just over 3 minutes. If you're doing it on your phone, it's a lot easier to sort of set up, but it should be between 3 and 5 minutes aside. Want your bowl of sugar set aside as well and ready for once you've got the final side of the cookie cooked. Welsh cakes are also sometimes called Welsh pancakes, and you can see from the coloring on it why we might call them that. So they should all get a bit of a splotchy brown. These ones are a bit longer cooked because I had an issue with the timer when I set it on my stove. I usually use my phone timer, which is one of my problems here, but because I'm filming this on my phone. But you should see the finished product soon. notice some of these ones have risen a bit as well, which actually comes out quite nice. That one in particular is really rising. This doesn't usually happen with my Welsh cakes, but it's happening right now, possibly because of the baking soda and baking powder that I've used. You want to go relatively quickly while taking these off so that you can sugar them, because you're trying to keep them all, from burning. You don't want to really overcook them too much. And I'm a little surprised at how much these have risen. I'm a little surprised at how much these have risen. They don't usually do this much rising, but that's totally fine. They'll still be quite nice, I think. In fact, sometimes they said they're a bit nicer when they're risen. Some people enjoy Welsh cakes with a bit of clotted cream or strawberries. This is a vegan recipe on it, so obviously if it's going to be a vegan person, they would want the clotted cream. There are some vegan recipes for clotted cream that you can get. I have tried out before, and they're quite nice. But I also, as I mentioned in the previous video, I'm fine with eating both. So. But usually I just eat the ones on their own anyway. They're great with tea, just on their own. These also get a little bit too cooked on one side because the temperature I tapped it by accident at the wrong time. There you have it. Instead of there's 25 quick Welsh cakes. Outside to cool, or set them down to cool, because they are still very, very hot. Don't eat them right away, but let them cool for a little bit, and they're quite nice when they're still warm. They should keep for several days as well. They can be eaten usually several days later, but over time they will dry out, and that's when they'll be no longer quite as enjoyable. I have heard people have heat them up to make them edible, but I haven't tried that myself.